screen now. Presentation mode. Okay, is this, can someone pop on and just let me know if they can see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. Good. So Ubicquia is the name of the company, comes from the term ubiquitous, meaning existing or being everywhere, especially at the same time. So in other words, omnipresent. And we understand as we get into this that streetlight systems tend to be the most ubiquitous or the most municipal facing, wide facing infrastructure that a municipality has. And so the name has come from that. And I just want to, but before I get any further, it's just to say thank you so much for giving an hour out of your time on a Tuesday afternoon to visit with us and to learn a little bit more about what we do and who we are and why we're doing it. So as I move forward here, I just want to make mention that our Ubicquia mission statement and the opportunity, rather, for all of us is that we want to leverage more than 360 million existing streetlights to deploy smart city, broadband, and cell platforms. With this, our ubicell Streetlight Router can turn any streetlight into a cost-effective and modular platform for deploying smart city services. Our core products that replace the existing photocells on top of streetlight poles are an advanced light control that has utility-grade metering in it. We will talk towards the end about public Wi-Fi and small cell services. And throughout the presentation with the ubicell, we'll talk about opportunities with sensor connectivity and edge processing for IoT applications. But it is, as we go forward here, you'll understand that it's just three very simple types of products that we'll be discussing: the ubicell, the ubihub, and the ubimetro. Just so you have a little understanding about who we are, our headquarters is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with engineering in Melbourne. And being that we were started in the South, there were a number of Southern utilities that got a hold of the who we were and the promise of the technology and began working with us on development of the product. And so for a lot of the base nature and the things that are in the product, they come out of all these conversations and needs that we recognize the utility industry had. And we also recognize, however, that the streetlight pole represents a unique situation where energy and the utility world is meeting the telecommunications world with what we can do through plugging in a twist lock on the NEMA socket at the top of the streetlight pole. And so this is where the street lighting system no longer is just a static system that lights certain parts of your road throughout a community. It is now a dynamic system that represents a really significant opportunity for those that own it, whether it's the utility or municipality, or even colleges and university campuses, places that have lights that want to be able to do things around safety and security and controlling the lighting system and energy efficiency that they could never do before. But because of this, and you'll see that there's two gentlemen here that I've highlighted from our board, one that came from the utility world, and then that's Alex Weiss, and then Ralph De La Vega, who was a former vice chairman of AT&T and the CEO of AT&T's Business Solutions and Mobility Unit. He had a long career with AT&T, and after retiring, came on board as our vice chair at Ubicquia. So we feel honored and very excited about the industry people that have looked at the product and said, this is it. This is something that needs to be deployed because of the promise and now the reality of what the technology holds. Before we get into the Ubicell itself, I just want to maybe frame up our conversation by mentioning a couple things. One is we hear an awful lot about smart cities and smart city initiatives and technologies. And if you were to go and ask uh, 10 different people across 10 different cities around the world, they may have differing views of what makes a city smart. And it might oftentimes be driven around the particular need or the use case that they're seeing for why they would want smart cities. But when we talk about smart and what it is that cities are really trying to do, it's the incorporation of the information and communications technologies along with the Internet of Things systems to do a couple specific things for a municipality to enhance the quality of living and promote sustainability. And smart cities, they've got three core values: livability, workability, and sustainability. And to the degree that we can deploy smart technology to enable and to help those things occur within a community, we feel it's a great contribution to the overall um, improvement of many cities and anywhere else they would want to use the nodes across the country and the world. Smart Cities World, a year or two ago, did a survey and identified, and I'm just going to focus on the top three here, identified the top uh, areas within a community that people were really looking for solutions or concerned about solutions from a smart perspective. And the top three ended up being citywide connectivity or public broadband, transportation and mobility, and lighting. And then you see waste and energy and city administration and so on. Um, I would like to propose that as we look at those things, you look at citywide connectivity and transportation and lighting, that many of those questions and things that people have wanted to do around those areas can be done by utilizing the street lighting infrastructure. And so the deployment of smart that Ubicquia has embraced and has moved forward with is utilizing the street lighting infrastructure as the backbone for these systems. And in fact, another survey done by the Northeast Group found that smart streetlights are well on their way to becoming the backbone for many smart city initiatives. It just represents a great starting point for launching many, many things that people have hoped to do in their cities for a long time. And with that, I just want to now introduce to you the first of the products, which is the Ubicell, our network light controller. It actually is a router, and it's got the ability to do a number of different things. And if we were to look at what it does, uh, we recognize that there are multiple people that within an organization would have different priorities for what they would want to do. Um, some might just be concerned about asset management, where others would be concerned about what can we do, what's the opportunity that we have in front of us to leverage the top of the pole to do things that we could never do before. So the node and then the variations of things that we can do beyond that, I think answer both of those questions. From an operations and maintenance standpoint, at its bare minimum, the ubicell is a photocell. It's a light controller. But not only is it a light controller, it is an advanced light controller. It can do things related to on, off, dimming, scheduling of lights. You can break the light, and we'll get into this a little bit more. I'll probably reiterate some of this as we go through a number of additional slides, but you can break down a lighting infrastructure into either working on an individual node or working with zones or working with groups to be able to adjust and make changes to how the lighting is employed within that particular area. Inside the node, there is an ANSI 12.20 certified utility power grade meter that measures line and load. The important part of that is it measures the power that goes or is drawn by the light and also the power that is going to be drawn by attachments that are on the pole. We are we feel we're in a blessed position at the moment, and there are many utilities around the country that are working on certain things, and certainly one in my neck of the woods in New York is working on trying to get regulatory approval for a networked light control metrology. That is super, super significant because if that can be done, then it opens up um, a huge conversation with how the metrology in the unit can be used for many, many different things within the utilities infrastructure. Um, these nodes can do stray voltage detection. They can identify power theft. And inside, they also have a digital accelerometer which can give us insight into tilt and vibration sensing. In areas where there's a lot of vibration, you may have lights that are end up going cockeyed or are just a little bit out of whack, and as a result, those lights are not properly lighting the ground that it was intended to light. But some of those things might not be as noticeable because they're not pole knockdowns. So the ability to understand the daily assessment of each light in a municipalities or utility system and to understand where potential issues might be is a super powerful thing. From an advanced perspective, we'll get into this in a little while. There are people tracking type technologies within the unit that can be employed, beacon triggers, and the ability to connect sensors for all sorts of smart city sensor applications. And it really is a simplified installation. We did a deployment of these nodes for the New York City DOT early last year. And we put these nodes, the contractor went out and put the nodes on the top of the lights, and within minutes, they were self-commissioning or had self-commissioned to UBview, which is our software panel. So it's designed, the router or the Streetlight network router is designed for plug and play, and designed to have over-the-air firmware updates, but it's designed to self-commission. So it eliminates an awful lot of additional legwork that has traditionally been a part of of commissioning processes in the past. It also is globally compatible. It can work on LED streetlights. It can work on HPS streetlights, although LED lights provide greater functionality. It has Dolly 2, and PWM drivers that can be employed in the unit for the different types of applications that will be necessary. And it works with most mobile operators globally. Literally, we want to be the infrastructure or the platform over which any one of these carriers could utilize to be able to implement the connectivity with them. Just some unique capabilities that the node has. It can work with 3, 5, and 7-pin NEMA sockets. It goes without saying, I think, but the 7-pin NEMA is going to give the most flexibility for doing advanced and additional services with the node. I'll explain that in a little bit. But we have one SKU product that covers all voltage ranges from 120 to 480 volt. It's got the dimming drivers, and as we said earlier, the GPS and tilt and vibration and so on. One of the things that is, as we were looking at deploying and developing a system, I want to have a brief conversation just around LTE. There are a number of different networks that are available in the field today, and those networks were designed and developed for certain reasons and have certain strengths to them. As we were looking at what to do with the Ubicell, it became very evident that LTE was an extremely powerful technology to be able to implement as a part of the network light control. Each node individually reports back to the system, so it doesn't rely on line of sight or meshing with other nodes. Therefore, if there is a problem with one node and one node goes down, it won't affect the rest of the system. There are no gateways or concentrators that are required. It becomes a very streamlined and again rapidly deployable, easy technology to get behind because of the ease of implementation. And additionally, the cell networks have been developed by the carriers over time, and they're robust, they're mature, and provide great connectivity for being able to do what we want to do. This is just a quick slide to give you an idea that wherever you can place a NEMA socket, you can stick a Ubicell. Uh, we know that in some cases, older decorative lights didn't have NEMA sockets. They had other places for the photocell. We've actually gone through an installation where when there was a light retrofit of an existing globe, that they were able to place a NEMA socket inside the globe and connect the Ubicell to it. So in that particular instance, the Ubicell is contained inside the globe and doing all the functionality that they wanted it to do. So wherever a NEMA socket is or can be wired to, we can stick a Ubicell. Just going through, I wanted to just introduce you to a couple of features and benefits that the Ubicell has. I mentioned it's a single SKU for 120 to 480 volt, dolly and dimming drivers so that they can auto configure. It has GPS technology in it and goes by the celestial clock. So when these units are placed on the light and they're powered up, they begin searching for the satellites, and within a very short period of time, you have extremely super accurate latitude and longitude coordinates for every light within the system. We also use the celestial clock and calendars for daylight hours. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but the simultaneous metering of line and load, so you can measure both sides of the circuit. We'll probably mention this again, but the metrology in the unit is class 0.1, which means it's 99.9% accurate. The high accuracy tilt and vibration sensor allow for just insight on the lights because the lights report back to the system multiple times a day. It allows for insight on the lights if anything has happened to the light. A pole knockdown is an obvious situation, but as I mentioned earlier, something like a freeze-thaw cycle or poles that are in ground that might not be as stable. In certain parts of Florida is very sandy soil, and so poles in that area can be affected by wind to a certain degree and might knock the light pole just outside of the realm of acceptability. But if it was, because it's not a knockdown, it might not register as that there's a problem with it. One of the great things about this is with the sensoring technology in it, you can set the thresholds of what is the acceptable range for that light to be in, and if it falls outside the threshold, it will send a notification. It's got 10-second last gasp, a non-volatile memory, which means it communicates its last state, and the data in the unit is permanently stored. LTE communications, global compatibility, wherever there's cell phone coverage, we can have these nodes. Over-the-air updates are done in minutes, not weeks and not months. We don't need to go to the pole to run some sort of update. It will be managed through the cloud and over the air, which rapidly allows for the changes to take place and allows it to be done all at one time. And then standard with the product is a 5-year warranty. We have an option to purchase an additional 5 years for a total of a 10-year warranty. And we just think that's somewhat significant and important because those are the warranties that you're seeing with many, many streetlights currently going into the market. So why Ubicquia lighting controls? Why is it important, or why is a conversation important for being able to network a lighting system and future ready it? Well, one, it reduces maintenance. For years, and I live up near Buffalo, New York, and for years, Buffalo used to employ guys that would drive around in trucks in the middle of the night looking for, or the utility would, looking for burned out lights. um, or drive around in the daytime and looking for day burners. With the ability to know and understand what's going on with your lighting system the whole time, you're able to very strategically identify and very quickly identify where issues might be and um, how many lights might be involved within a particular area, so that instead of shooting into a haystack, you have a much more riveted target of understanding the maintenance issues that are arising on a daily or weekly basis, and then being able to correct them and correct them quickly. With the dimming and the scheduling, it allows for the reduction of energy costs, just as we experience internally in buildings. When you relight or relamp a building with LED and you put control technology in it, aux sensors and whatnot, you're able to harvest more savings out of that building. And the general rule holds true outside. You can retrofit your system with LED lights, but if you retrofit and control the system, you're able to gather additional energy savings out of it. Um, for whoever is owning the asset, it's very much an improved asset management system. The metrology is is accurate, and therefore there's an increased efficiency in the amount of power that's being burned. And overall, the more responsive you can make a system, and the greater activity you can put to it, you create a better overall customer satisfaction for how that lighting infrastructure is going to serve the community. As we get into some of the advanced smart city applications, it's important to note that every streetlight can now become a smart city hub. There's two-wire communications for the power and the data, and two-way communication. In other words, the sensors communication can come to the node, and communication can come out from the node. The ubicell provides for all data backhaul right into our software panel called UBView. And UBView is a very open API system for allowing the aggregation of all this data that can then be pushed out to the various stakeholders that would need to study it, see it, and understand it. And I think I just say this at this point, that there is an enormous amount of sensors on the market, and I believe more coming all the time. So there's an awful lot of things that municipalities and schools and utilities are able to do with sensors that they were never able to do before. And we've just listed some of the more popular ones here: air quality, motion sensing, wind speed and direction, rain and snow gauges, water levels, ice sensors, all this type of data. Ubiquia's desire is that we would create the backbone to help the end user aggregate the data so that the end user owns it and studies it. We don't want to, just an important distinction, we don't want to or need to get into the ownership of it. We just want to create it so that those that really need it and have been looking for answers are able to study and then implement the information they get. And to that end, we have a third-party sensor and data certification program. We've tested a number of sensors with our ubicells, and we know which ones work. But if someone has a sensor that they'd like us to test and try, we say to send it on down to engineering, and we'll make sure it plays well with our stuff and send it back and say we're good to go. But we typically have made it a point to stay with utility and industrial grade sensors, those with hardened communications and security implementations, so that we can keep the system safe and stable. There are a couple other features to the ubicell that go into the advanced services. I guess I'd call it the other things you can do with the radios in the unit. And by the way, there's 3 radios in the ubicell. There's the LTE SIM card for the backhaul, and there is Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And the Wi-Fi in the unit is going to be used for location-based services, doing things like people movement, tracking people movement, identifying congestion levels, and monitoring dwell time. Um, we did a deployment in the financial district right around the Market Bowl, as I mentioned earlier, and turned on this technology, this footfall, on Valentine's night last year. And what it basically does is it all encrypted reads the IP MAC address of every phone that passes the node. And so we were able to study the data and determine, how many devices were seen at one point, and then were seen at the next node, and how long the journey took. So if you consider the need of developing information about how people are moving through a community, where they're moving and what they're doing, if that's important to you or your end use clients, there's an ability to do that with a system. We would run it in campaigns, you study the data, but ultimately you're looking to determine how people are moving so that you can create a better experience for them. Um, I'm working and having conversations with the World Trade Center, and on that 16-acre piece of property in Lower Manhattan, they get hundreds of thousands of people moving there through there on a daily basis. They've got some interior stuff where they can count people that set up, but they know that they're missing an opportunity, and we're trying to figure out the best way to do this so that they can understand how people are moving through that campus to create a better customer experience all around the World Trade Center area, especially as they begin to build another tower. So that is how the location services can be utilized with the Wi-Fi. The beaconing technology can turn every streetlight into a Bluetooth beacon, beaconing out public service announcements, Amber Alerts, messages that you would want to communicate to city residences. If there's an accident in a certain way and traffic's being blocked. One of the things we did in our demo with the DOT was we beaconed out the Staten Island Ferry schedule to to phones past that node, and so people would walk by and bing, all of a sudden they've got the Staten Island Ferry schedule on their phone. So it's those types of things that can be communicated effectively through beaconing technology. And this is just another example of this technology that was used over in Ireland, and it's a pier area. And as the nodes have been picking up data on phones in certain areas, you're able to do things like developing heat maps that show where congestion is, and help determine directionality of how people are moving through the pier area and how long they're staying in a certain spot. So all this information can be gathered and utilized for making an area more efficient overall for the people that have to move through it. We can also, there's a lot of information on this, and I recognize that, and don't want to have you have to read through and focus on all of this, but this is just a specification sheet for the Ubicell. Certainly, if you have interest, we can send you out a specification sheet separately, and if you'd like to communicate that to Bob, he can let me know, and we'll get that out. But this is just some of the features of it. I think one of the things that we often get asked is the average power consumption, and you'll see that it's about half a watt. It's IP66 rated. It can has a lamp power of up to 720 watts that it can hold. And as we spoke about earlier, the line voltage can be 120 to 480, all in a single skew. So those are just some things I want to just point out on the specification sheet. Bob and Lumecon have a few lines of lights that are popular and have gone around the country, and we just wanted to provide you just an idea of what it would look like if a Ubicell was placed on one of those lights. So here's just a quick couple pictures, this slide and the next, of what a Ubicell would look like installed on top of one of these decorative lights. In addition, we mentioned this earlier, a lot of decorative lights need to be retrofitted. And through a retrofitting kit, you can stick a Ubicell on a decorative as well. Just a couple additional things. UBView, it is our SaaS panel, our software panel for the accumulation of all the information on every single light. So an end use customer, if they've got 1,000 lights in their system, they would get the software panel, and every one of those lights individually would show up on that panel with the accurate latitude and longitude coordinates, as well as information on the power uh, going to that particular light. By the way, I don't know how many of you have dealt with municipalities getting ready to do a light retrofit, but oftentimes in preparation for that, a lighting contractor or an engineering firm wants to have the system audited and a bunch of information accumulated on the system that then helps them with proper lighting design. I mention this because all of that information that has been developed through good work like that previously can be lined up and imported into the system so that UBView essentially becomes your massive encyclopedia of all of the um, information related to your streetlight system, including latitude, longitude coordinates. It's got a map service in it where you can see, like just like Google Earth, where you can see the photo as well as just where the lights are. Um, you can manage the nodes individually or through zones and groups within the system. Um, a great example to this is, let's say New York City, the 5 boroughs. You've got the Manhattan borough might make one zone, and within that zone, you've got Little Italy, and you've got Chinatown, and you've got Hell's Kitchen, and you've got a bunch of different areas that are identified, and those areas could be groups located within a zone, and you could attach a different lighting schedule to each individual group within a zone or to the zone as a whole. So it gives you an incredible amount of flexibility and an opportunity to shave off KWHs and create some more efficiency in the system. The threshold management, the system reports to you on whether the tilt is out of whack, the tilt angle on the light is out of whack, voltage levels and current levels, if those are out of whack, so you can start to understand if things are not quite as they should be with the system. All the sensor data can be aggregated through the backhaul of the LTE network in the Ubicell and into the UBView panel. And of course, as we mentioned, all the data and the control of that data can be pushed out to various end user entities that would need it by virtue of the open API system that we have. So what are some of the benefits of this? Is it, as we said earlier, maintenance avoidance, and efficiency really of your inventory, of working with your inventory in an efficient manner so that people that are monitoring and managing the system can reduce lost time through waste by being able to target exactly what needs to be done. The system will also provide work order generation and reports of the status quo, or if there's something wrong. All that type of information will be available in the UBView system for someone to use for management purposes. And this is just a quick picture of the home page of the system. You'll see that it's set up in tiles. And if you were to look along the side here, you could break out the overall panel into nodes or groups or zones. And this allows you to just have a lot of functionality. Up here is a reporting section, and there's about 9 to 10 standard out-of-box reports that we have, with more coming. So there's a number of different ways that this system can be leveraged to gather in and work with all of the information that's being collected on the system. Open APIs allow for the data in and out. The application works on mobile devices, and it's customizable for unique applications. So that is the ubicell, the router. I just want to touch on a couple things as well going forward, because as we talked about smart city applications, one of the greater interests in smart city applications was public broadband and Wi-Fi. And it's interesting. I'm sure we can all look back and remember when technology had a curve of about 5 to 7 years, where it would take that long to for something to change, and that has rapidly reduced. It's gone to 2 years, to 1 year, and now we're talking about changes in technology that occur multiple times within the course of a year. And so what I want to just get a touch on now is an application that we did for densifying public Wi-Fi this past year in San Jose. The Ubicell was able to have an additional public Wi-Fi chip put in the top of the unit. And with that, we were able to successfully utilize the UV cells to pull from an already existing access point to create a dense, more even usage of the Wi-Fi system further into the park where connectivity hadn't been possible previously. So that was the application that we did last year. And I say this now because I wanted to just use this slide as a placeholder to let you know, we were working on these applications last year, but over the course of the last number of months, the thought from our leadership, senior leadership, and engineering departments that have gone into what to do around public Wi-Fi has been incredible. And in Q2, Q3 of this year, we are releasing a new, an already existing type of technology that we had that we've now re-engineered, and it's the UB Hub. The UB Hub is going to be, it's a gigabit switch, and it's going to be able to do public Wi-Fi. What I mean by that is it will be able to act with fiber attached to it as an access point on a pole, and it will also be able to act as a densifier or a repeater to pull from access points. So the UB Hub is a gigabit switch that was just going to allow for, again, rapid deployment, cost-effective deployment of being able to do applications of public Wi-Fi. With this, I'll mention that we have an incredible project engineering team that when we get to a scenario where there is an interest in public Wi-Fi, it really, there's a part of this that is an art and a science. And so when we get into these installations, we very early on bring in the project management team to help with the designing and the understanding and the supporting of the solution and how it's going to work. But just know that as of this coming summer, the UB Hub will be available, and we're very excited about the changes in this and what that's going to do for public Wi-Fi installations. With the gigabit switch, it also is running on something called Wi-Fi AX or Wi-Fi 6, which is the most current standard for how Wi-Fi ought to be conducted and deployed. And so that's going to just make the system as robust as it can be, and yet offer the flexibility of being able to put it or densify it to where it needs to go. In addition to that, I just want to mention again, because the network light controller is what we're doing now. Ubicell 2.0 is where orders being taken and shipments are going to be starting imminently. But as we're positioning for the future, we then get into those additional situations like we just described with public Wi-Fi. I also want to make mention of one other thing without getting too far ahead of the skis, but the unit, the UB Hub, is going to come out in two different applications, one a public Wi-Fi application and another application that will have 4 cameras and 2 microphones. We'll be able to do real edge processing type applications for understanding curb management and things surrounding the city, gunshot detection and items like that. So those units, both the Wi-Fi hub and the AI hub, will be out Q2, Q3 later this year. Along with that, we've also have produced the industry's first 4G, 5G small cell that twists locks into the NEMA socket at the top of the streetlight pole and collars to the pole itself. Again, the whole vision of this was to provide rapid and low-cost deployment of being able to get small cells into the market. It's very interesting. Small cells have been out for quite some time now, but there's a real hurdle that the is being experienced by the, the 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 telco providers and people that want to implement small cells in the field, in that they're having a real difficult time trying to get enough small cells sited by the municipalities and by governments and all the powers that be, in terms of where they have to go. Oftentimes, that's because it's associated with, siting them in places, right, on the sides of buildings, or where you have to deal with all sorts of building owners. The vision of utilizing the streetlight system, an already existing public system, is going to allow for an incredible flexibility and hopefully a lot more rapid and robust growth of the small cells as we go forward, because they're utilizing an infrastructure that's already there. So just know that that's something that is also um, coming out later this year. Um, we have three different versions of it: the UB Metro NEMA that plugs into the NEMA socket, a retro which goes underneath, so you can maintain, as this picture shows you on the right, the ubicell functionality direct into the light, and you can site the small cell right underneath the driver box, and then plumb the wiring into the pole. There's also the retro, which is a version that we have worked with a couple lighting manufacturers, where they wanted to know if we could put a shield over the unit to effectively make it look like it's part of the light. So those are three options that we have, and we're excited about how the gear will be able to be utilized going forward, for the densification of small cell technology. And really, what we're trying to do is avoid what we all have known and seen as we drive around our communities. Um, Oftentimes, small cell installations or Wi-Fi installations aren't attractive. Oftentimes, they involve an awful lot of gear, um, and can make poles look ugly. Uh, Not to mention the weight and how that weight might be distributed on the pole. So these are just three examples. Left is a small cell installation, the middle is a public Wi-Fi installation, and on the right there is a picture of a smart pole, which has all this technology included in it, but they're very expensive, and cost even more than to place in the ground, and just is not as rapidly deployable and user friendly as being able to just utilize the top of lights. So with that, we're at the end of the presentation, and I just want to recap. And again, thank you so much for the time that you've given. We wanted to be able to um, alert you to the developments that we've had with the Ubicell and all things related to the Ubicell: smart city sensors, Bluetooth beaconing, um, the people monitoring movement, the tilt and vibration, the utility power grade meter for measuring line and load, and everything that's associated with the Ubicell, to be able to help an end user manage their asset in a way that they have never before been able to manage it. So that is extremely exciting for us. Then we also spent a few moments discussing the hub, which is the public Wi-Fi gigabit switch, and the video and audio processing AI version of that, which is also part of that gigabit switch, and then the small cell technology. And so the vision of the company is to be able to utilize the street lighting assets, most importantly the NEMA socket at the top of the pole, for the deployment of these things going forward, to be able to make a city not just smart and give them a platform to run on, but to future-proof it for things that are coming down the road as well. And with that, I just want to thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to be able and exciting to be able to share these things with you. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bob for questions.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate it. Again, if you guys have a question, just tap on my symbol, the RH symbol, one of the participants, and you'll see a chat button, and you can actually type in a question, and we'll try our best to answer it. I do want to say, while you're doing that Keith and I have met with several cities, and a lot of these guys are struggling with cell carriers, and everybody wants to put their own equipment up. on all these poles. They're basically trying to take eminent domain, or they're going to pay a very low price to try to get onto their poles. Again, like Keith said, they're not taking into consideration EPA or and other things that the poles were maybe not made to do. So this is where the small cell and some of these other products come in very, very handy. It allows the city to keep a nice, clean, and control, clean look and control the system. The other part that the other part of the system that is about Ubicquia that we're very, very excited about is that, like what Keith mentioned, and that there's a project management team. And so let's face it, 90% of us on this webinar right now, when Keith talks about UB Hub and gigabit switches and 5G carriers, it's all Greek to us, right? And so if a municipality is really struggling with deploying a Wi-Fi system and deploying a cellular or control system, they really have a great team that can come in and really explain and talk the talk and walk the walk with the municipality technical experts, and really act as a consultant, if you will, to the municipality to help them deploy. And it's such an affordable system that, when they take a look at it compared to what others are offering today, it's almost a no-brainer. So Keith, we're going to jump into some questions. The first one we've got here today is, what is the solution when there isn't any cell service? What happens?
That's a great question. We have done some work around LoRa and another application called YSUN, and we know that those are line of sight type of applications, and they work. And we are laser focused on certainly the LTE system, but I would encourage you that if you have an area that is not cell based, it doesn't have the appropriate infrastructure from a cellular perspective, there are other solutions. We just need to know what those use cases are. But LoRa is one potential, YSUN is another potential.
Okay. Another question is, what's the transmit power of the LTE radio? What's the range from the tower?
Of this small cell? Or of the, which product, I guess?
I'll wait
They could
for
identify that.
Alex to weigh in. Hold on a second. The control node.
The control node. Okay, great. It's going to be, well, it goes right into the cloud. So there is no major restriction on the control node communicating to the cloud, if I understood her question correctly, or the question correctly. So because it's not a gateway scenario where you don't have 15 or 30 cells communicating to a gateway that then takes it into the cellular cloud, every one of these nodes individually is communicating directly into the cloud.
Okay. And I will say real quickly, if for some reason we don't answer your question correctly and or in full, please drop me a note, and I can go ahead and we can get you a more exact answer directly.
Yes. Yeah, please do. Can I apologize if I didn't understand the question correctly and gave you the answer you needed? So yeah, please reach out to Bob and let him know.
Another question, does the Ubicquia 5G offering enable multiple cell providers to ride the 5G radios, or are they locked into one particular cell provider at a time?
That's a good question. At this moment, the small cell is scheduled to be dual carrier. And so therefore what you do is, if you had multiple carriers in an area, you would cite um, the small cell for a carrier on one pole and the next carrier on the next pole, and so on.
Okay. What happens in a disaster? For example, when we had the fires here, I believe that there were issues within the cell service. I would assume functionality could be limited. Bluetooth beacons could be valuable during a disaster, but if they may have issues with functionality, the value seems questionable.
So if
Talking
I,
about emergency beacons, I think when you mentioned that.
yes, if certainly if the cellular network is there's issues with it, the beaconing, the technology is going to it's going to work as a cellular network works, right? So um, there, I think if you're talking about a major overall disaster, that's a different conversation than if you've got the ability to utilize the beaconing services for smaller targeted areas. I will say that you may have seen some commercials in the last 5, 6 months for a system that AT&T has built from the ground up called FirstNet, and it is a system where that was built from the ground up specifically for public safety, and it's a separate frequency because if you remember when 9/11 happened, the cellular network was so overburdened that first responders weren't able to communicate. And that started a whole process of how do we, as a nation, create a system that first responders can always have access to. I mentioned this because there's been some talk, and there's nothing formal, but think about the ability where nodes may down the road. I need to clarify this and be very careful with it because it's not the case now, but the possibility of utilizing a network solution like this to piggyback with the FirstNet solution. But like I said, that's something that has been discussed, and to answer that question that the gentleman asked, you'd be dealing with a separate frequency to enable to help first responders.
Great, thanks, Keith. Looks like we have a final question. Will a specification and cell sheets be available to promote Ubicquia? So I think I can field that one. I will tell you that Lumecon is adding to its cut sheets an option to add Ubicquia Wireless Controls. So that'll be on every light, one of our lights cut sheets. We will be adding a control section to the website to promote Ubicquia. So there'll be cell sheets and the like that will be produced by us and Ubicquia. And then last but not least, Keith, with your permission, we did record this webinar today. And I assume you're okay with us forwarding a link to it if somebody would like to review it. Is that correct?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So there's that ability too.
Sure. And Bob, I just want to clarify something I just said with relation to FirstNet. I want to be clear that there's that's something to think about from a possibility standpoint. It's not something that is real today of our tying into something like that. But I mentioned that to answer that gentleman's question with regard to how you would potentially utilize a system. And at this point, a FirstNet system would be something that would take the place of a cellular system if the cellular system would go down. So I just want to clarify that there's nothing where we are absolutely doing that with AT&T, but you can just understand a system like this, the flexibility of it, how down the road something like that could take place.
Understood. And the system's adaptable to that if that were to happen.
Yeah.
Yep. Is that correct? That's a question. Okay. All right. I don't have any other questions in the queue right now. So at this point in time, I just want to do a send off and thank Keith for all of his time. We appreciate you. And we appreciate everyone that's taken, again, the time to spend with us this afternoon. Hopefully we learned a little bit, and we think the relationship is going to be fruitful for all of us involved. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And again, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, or other. Otherwise, get out there and sell some Lumecon, and we appreciate everyone again.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.